everybody, this is Becca Epley, and I have just spent my morning editing our conversation with Gabes Torres. And for the first time in over 50 episodes, I finished editing a podcast, and I feel so relaxed and at peace and ready to start my day. I just want to encourage you all as you begin to listen to this conversation with Gabes, just to sit in a place where you can really take in and hear the wisdom in the heart, that not only the words that Gabe says, but their presence. Hello, and welcome to Permission to Be.
Let's hit him with the remix.
Oh, well, y'all got to change
Yes. Yes.
What do we do?
We leave our F-bombs in and...
Let's tell some stories.
As long as white people are bound, the people in power are bound, they're going to keep us bound to the same thing that they're bound to.
Out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks, and I think out of the overflow of the spirit, the body does.
Challenge some narratives.
Why is that the best that God could offer you?
Mike made it very clear that he did not want to get any of these questions beforehand. So he is getting this question live, raw, for the very first time.
This is...
And I feel like art is the expression of the heart where words fail.
Raw.
Oh my goodness, I have tears. Oh, you all are killing it.
Unfiltered.
I feel like that's gotta sound strange.
Permission to be.
Actually, my literary agent, when we were talking about what book might I write, he was like, I mean, A Black Man with Hope is an interesting book.
Oh, shit.
Oh, that's brilliant. The moment that it hit record, he snorted out of beautiful laughter.
It's the best.
I'm a snort laughter. I am a snort laughter.
Beautiful. It means you mean it.
Right.
Your whole face is involved.
Like the cheeks hurt, the eyebrows go up. It's like, it's a whole body experience, let me tell you. So there was this man growing up that I knew. His name was Steve Ellenbaugh, and he was like what they call a circuit overseer in the Jehovah's Witnesses. They're like over multiple congregations, or like the head elder sort of over this like I don't know, 12 congregations or whatever. This man was from Arkansas, and he was the funniest man that I've ever met in my entire life. And like he had this like whole body, like he laughed, you laughed, and I just remember thinking, I was like, I want to be the person like one day that like when I laugh, I want my laugh to make.
Oh, boo! I think you
laugh.
already do
And
that.
so, yeah.
The laughs.
No, but seriously, like even at Watershed,
So
you hear like when you laugh, like you can literally. It's like everybody takes a collective deep breath. Like, oh yeah.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Collective deep breath. Receive it.
Oh, and you've done that for
Receive
longer
it.
than you know.
okay. Yes. I don't think anybody's ever said like people take a deep breath like around you. I don't know. There's something spiritual about that, I feel like. So that hits me differently than like, oh, Tommy, we love your laugh. We like, you're such a cool person. You're so like, I guess because especially in the last 2-3 years, the work I've been doing around breath, like, and how breath has trailed so much through my spiritual evolution. Like to hear that, it's like breath is life. And so to know that, like, when I hear that, like in my brain, what happens is oh, Tommy, when people take a breath or they're taking in life around you. And so I was like, oh. So I'm like, I'm not going to cry, but I might cry, whatever.
You bring us back into our bodies.
Oh. Welcome to Permission to Be, everybody.
We have Gabes with us tonight.
Hi, y'all. We're like giggly.
I mean,
is Mercury in retrograde or something?
It is actually, right? It is. I think so. Yeah,
I'm pretty sure.
We're supposed to be off, but we're doing okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'm generally off. I'm doing okay because I have a microphone in front of my face, but like, I'm mentally exhausted. Probably.
Babe.
I mean, it's my own fault, and I recognize that. But also, I feel like we should. Who is Gabes? Gabes Torres. Who is Gabes Torres?
Why are we having trouble with introductions? Introductions are so tough for me.
I think I have a theory about that. I don't necessarily like to introduce myself as much as I like people to experience me. And I like that. Right. It's like, I feel like introductions, because there's like, who are you? What do you do? People begin to form all these like opinions and perspectives about you.
Expectations.
You're right. Versus if you just go in and like you're already breaking those norms. So you're already challenging what people expect of you.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, that's kind of rude, but also this person's really funny, or they're like really nice, or they're like, I like this person, or like, why? So I'm just very curious, why do we have to do, what is the point of introductions versus like, just like, sometimes it's nice to have an unadulterated like experience of a person.
Yeah. And that can be disarming, which kind of like makes me think about how that's not our default when we do introductions. We don't experience the other because it in some ways we have to like put our guards down when we see somebody and allow somebody else to see us. And being in such a disembodied society, a very disembodied culture that's afraid to be in vulnerability, that can be daunting. That it's easier to intellectualize the introduction, that it's easier to like make the heady statements instead of like having to experience Tommy and Becca as y'all are in your fullness, and to have y'all see and understand me in my fullness. So that's just where my mind goes, that it's more it's more disarming. So it's not, it doesn't surprise me that it's not the default.
Yeah. Why do you think that is?
Well, a lot of things. Just being in this like white Western cis heteropatriarchal society that immediately labels vulnerability as, you know, we can make a list like weakness, as inadequate, as incompetent, et cetera, et cetera. To be in the body was and is like regarded as something that's not productive, something that doesn't get you places. So yeah, we can go in many directions, multiple directions around that.
I was going to say those with capitalism. I mean, it just doesn't work to be embodied.
Why is that, Becca?
What comes to mind is what Gabes mentioned a minute ago. It's the being productive, getting things done, in living in a capitalistic society where we're constantly striving for forward motion, for more, for production, for higher value, not necessarily in quantity, but in getting more money for whatever the product is. If you're embodied, you're going to acknowledge some truths. And it feels like capitalism doesn't have time for that, doesn't have time for honesty, doesn't have time for reflection. Those things would only slow down the systems.
Yeah. And yet I still feel like capitalism finds a way to profit off of bodies.
Yeah. I mean,
or so like what I think this is interesting. For some reason my brain goes to the wellness industry.
Yep, mine too. I went there too.
Would you say that the wellness industry, and it's a very broad generalization, right? There's, you could include a lot of things in the wellness industry. Like you could include what I do. Gabes, you're a psychotherapist. You could include that, but also sort of this entry into yoga and mindfulness and like, aside from all the problematic nature of those things once they stretch into appropriation, is it possible under those systems to practice embodiment, or are you just going through the motions?
That's a really good question that I maybe at some point in my life I also asked myself, because it seemed like the people who do practice it in contexts that are culturally appropriating other cultures, it seems like they're so convinced, and it seems like they're sincere and authentic about how much they do feel like they are in their bodies. Mm-hmm. And there's a part of me that's like, my Enneagram style is also 4. Like I question the authenticity in that moment and the fullness, if they're actually like, are they actually in their body? Especially if like see particularly white cis women who practice yoga and who are very elaborate and very, they share about it in their social media about their experiences and how much that industry they're benefiting from. And there's a part of me that's like, I think about how these practices, these embodiment movement practices, mindfulness, these are ancient practices. And it makes me want to like take a trip into like, how was it like for these indigenous teachers for these pre-colonial times, and how it is these embodiment exercises were different in their experience versus how, majority white cis women are experiencing right now. And I know that I will never get to that awareness. I will not know that fully, but I know that there is something that's not just missing in how much yoga right now is like whitewashed. It's not just something that's missing, but it's like, I have to ask, like, what this is happening, but at whose expense, at what cost? Like if you are doing this, and this is when I like address the fact that health and wellness and the journey of healing is also political, because we have to ask the question that if we take the steps to heal our bodies, our psyches, is it actually for healing? Is it actually for freedom? Or is it going to cost somebody else's healing? Is it going to cost somebody else's freedom? And so that's when I like address that it is not authentic if it is at the expense of somebody else's body, or or if it's going to cost somebody else to suffer more or labor more. And perpetuate an already existing inequitable structure that's not just in capitalistic society, but also in the wellness industry, also in mental health, also in all fields, because they're all cousins.
Yeah. That intent versus impact of what's actually occurring. Tommy.
Yes.
I'm trying to read you. So, as a way of introductions, I am a psychotherapist, so I've been trying to read both of you this whole time. I'm kidding.
So in that moment, I was like debating, like, how do we proceed? Like, we'll probably edit this part out, and then. Like now, we're probably not going to edit this part out.
I am a huge advocate of play. You know, sometimes like when podcast interviews are like I'm more drawn to podcast interviews, but I can't speak on behalf of everybody else. But I just love it when people just talk.
Yeah,
you know.
Well, I think that's something that like Becca and I like. We even debate about in terms of the product of the podcast that we like want to send out to the audience, right? And so it's a podcast called Permission to Be.
See, that's what I assumed. I'm like, I take it from the title. So
right?
Here I am.
We technically do very little editing aside from putting in music and maybe like separating like pauses and things.
Sure.
And then there's one other thing that's like come to my attention. that
Tommy didn't realize I was doing.
The podcast.
That's where this is going.
What's happening?
So Becca, when she edits the podcast, she will kind of cut out some of the uhs and the and whatnot, and to like tidy up the speech a little bit.
Sure.
And so I was like,
let's talk about it with
why you do
Gabes,
that?
our friend who's a psychotherapist.
Oh my gosh.
Are we really going to like put her to work?
Totally being a smart ass.
But it's been a very interesting, you know, the talking about authenticity and showing up in play. I think filler words they're part of human language, and for me it goes into this philosophical place of like we call ourselves permission to be. How much should we be embodying or living into that ourselves, and how much should we show to the audience, right? And so what's that balance of cutting those things out, and at what sacrifice? And I think Becca has great points, and I hope you will cut in and speak on it.
Oh, y'all, I'm not upset at all. I'm just listening. I'm seeing where
I
going.
was just so I think, you know, and so but I'm enjoying playing even in that conversation because it's extracting all these like nuances about what people think and people's perceptions and kind of how people navigate safety in the world too, even. And yeah, it's interesting, I guess, what happens behind the scenes at times. And so it's a really beautiful invitation to just play. And I think it's a really good reminder for us about who we strive to be in the journey. Even as we're learning, even as we're making mistakes in the work of like anti-racism or in our analysis of society of where we see ourselves. And so, anyway, it was really long-winded. Somebody else say something.
Well, speaking of being anti-capitalist, right? And one of the core components of being capitalist is this myth of perfectionism, which is an impossible level or place to be in. And there's something about like you coming face to face with somebody as yourself, not self-editing, that invites the other person to also show up as they are. Because then I'm going to go like neurological here, but there's something about like you bearing witness to somebody else's full honesty, honest self, unmasked self, that makes it feel like it's okay. That's the mirror neurons that goes on, that not very many people feel safe, even courageous or willing enough to be unmasked. And so everybody just puts it on all the time. And so I'm all about the play. I'm all about the unedited version of potentially this podcast that y'all are listening to. I'm also really proud of myself right now that I compelled y'all to talk about the podcast, the philosophy of the podcast while I am here, which I'm like, as a therapist, I'm like, wow, I am doing my work here. I am letting y'all self-reflect, assess your actual philosophy. So this is my legacy. It is February 4th, 2021.
I mean, you're just damn good at what you do. Like, just hold it
Tell
right
my
on
therapist
out.
I can wait another week.
So, all right, let's talk about that. Let's flip roles here. Why did you go into therapy? Like,
it's a long story.
You've gotten like. I hope people really grasp sort of the beautiful trajectory of the conversation that we just had, and all of the things that subtly happened in it. But it's a testament to your gift. But so I'm just very curious, like, what's brought you on this journey?
Thank you. So I was born and raised in the Philippines, and in my culture specifically, we don't talk about mental health. Mental health is taboo. In fact, I grew up in a Protestant Filipino home where, if you pray hard enough, if you read your Bible long enough, that's going to get rid of the depression, the anxiety. In fact, having depression and anxiety is probably an indication that you're not praying or reading the Bible enough, kind of thing. So for the longest time, I kind of like rejected that part of me that wanted to be curious around, what goes on with us emotionally, psychobiologically, etc. I went to seminary. I went to theological school in Chicago, and I did it again for grad school. And I just so happened to go to a grad school where they leaned into the intersection of theology and psychology, which I've never heard of before. Because before, when you talk about theology and spirituality, or anything that's Christian, anything to do with psychology is like opposite, quote unquote opposite. And so that, to me, my subconscious was drawn to that and wanted to like interrogate that, the intersection of fields. Initially, I wanted to do some work around training missionaries to do better, because when as somebody who was raised in a developing country that was often visited by many Westerners who were like talking about this white Jesus, there's a part of me that's like, y'all need to contextualize y'all just need to do better. And so that's why I wanted to do theology, because missionaries weren't doing good. So with my experience, there's this arrogance around white Christian missionaries who say that, our gospel is the gospel. our news is the good news. And anything that is different from this is not what they call authorial intent, wasn't what the Bible wants to say. If there's anything in our culture that had to do with with dancing, with how we engage with one another and interact with one another, that happens to be different from the gospel that which they were teaching, then it has to go away. And to me, that's I don't think that that's the church.
Oh boy.
I think, right. And excuse me, why would you reject dancing? First and foremost, I'm offended by that. So there's this this part of me that's y'all don't contextualize and know yourselves. And so I wanted to be a part of some movement or some study that examines the white psyche that is so convinced that they're right all the time, when really I didn't think of the Christian faith as something that it's not about being right. It's about, to me, it's about connection. It's about it's not about the position, whether or not you got this doctrine, this dogma accurate. It's me being in relation to you, because you, in your fullness, I see God, and God is in you. So I feel like there was such a huge miss there. And so I could not help but respond to that by doing more theology work. And so I did work around post-colonial studies. I studied a lot about how white supremacy is a global issue, and how much that is shown in the Filipino people's internalized oppression, where we regard whiteness as superior and us as inferior, and how that resulted in many different forms, whether that may be a self-rejection of our culture, and also into colorism and anti-Blackness, et cetera, et cetera. And then I stumbled upon more readings around how much white supremacy and racism affects us psychobiologically. And then I learned about the intergenerational transmission of trauma and of resilience and of medicine. So in my work, I have to be intentional about mentioning or stating that we have inherited, when I say we, I mean Black, Brown, Indigenous, and people of color. We have not only inherited pain and maybe even shame and trauma, but we've also inherited strength and beauty and resilience and creativity. So that's when I wanted to do mental health, is to be a part of this, I don't even want to call it a field of study, but this movement, this community where we can have a conversation about what it means to be in our body, to see or to witness what are the ancestral memories that are stored in our bodies. How can we validate one another with pain that we don't think is ours, with the tears that we think is both ours and sometimes not even ours, with the dreams that we have. And when I say dreams, I mean nightly dreams, and also our waking dreams, our vision and our desire that is our own and also being passed on.
Whew, Lord have mercy. Wow.
So is the theological piece still a part of where you're at right now?
Yesterday I tweeted that, back up. Yesterday, I finally said to myself, I am not a Christian. And when I say Christian, I mean that in this particular context, in evangelicalism, in Western evangelicalism. I don't identify as a Christian anymore. And when I say that, I also don't mean that I don't believe in the brown Jesus and I don't respect the Christians. Well, that's also really debatable, but you know what I mean? I am not going to impose I am not going to like convince them that their faith tradition is wildly, profoundly problematic, for a lot of them. But I just don't identify with this institution, this community that has caused so much trauma, that caused so much harm. And when I said that yesterday to myself out loud, I just felt this relief, this waterfall of happiness. And I felt like, somehow I felt like my ancestors rejoiced with me, because it really did feel misaligned since I could even complete a sentence verbally. Like, I know that there was something, not necessarily more, but something that's different. And to me right now, if we're talking about the theological piece or the spiritual piece, I am leaning more towards like ancestral connection, more around how we are connected to the stars, to the cosmos, to Mother Earth, which is so different from how Christian hegemony has taught about this hierarchy of dominance, that we are the highest species that ought to rule and dominate and just take whatever we want from Mother Earth. If anything, I would call it more ancient, really. And it's inevitable to keep talking about church and spirituality for me. That's an area that I will never. It's a core component of who I am.
Yeah.
And whether I would talk about it as loving critique or as a way to be with you, because this is something that you are passionate about, then I can be present with that. And I have a lot to say around that and a lot of stories around that, whether they are harmful and also life-giving, because I'm not one who would just emphasize the shadow part of Christianity, because just like all other like faith expressions and forms of spirituality, there's just as much shadow as there is beauty and goodness, which is nuance that a lot of people are really afraid of, because people want a God who is sovereign and in control and like just good. People want the binary or the absolute, because it's kind of like their emotional anchor, which, as a trauma specialist, like that makes sense. Like if you're traumatized, ambiguity is terrifying. The lack of control is terrifying. And so I want to come from a place of understanding and also hold that person accountable for their actions and their decisions and words. So.
Oh, so good.
It's interesting being on the other side of that. Like, it's hard for me to see something good from it. And so that's a really good reminder for me. I tend to linger in the shadows of what it was. And so that's a really good, because there are good things, like our growing, we don't grow without walking through experiences and moving forward. Yeah. But it's easy just to focus on the shadow.
Absolutely. My invitation to you, or to anybody who has a very, it makes sense why there's a tendency to look at just shadow. My invitation to people is to look at the capital C church, like the global church, to look at how, Christianity looks like in different parts of the world outside of the US, so-called North America, because a lot of them, I believe, are embodying, the brown Jesus, the brown refugee Jesus, through their generosity, through their togetherness. And it's not to say that they're perfect. I mean, I'm sure that there are many things that need to be addressed and changed, but to look at the capital C church is my invitation to people all the time.
What I loved about when you were talking earlier is how you've talked about how you've always known that it wasn't about just, following this sovereign God. It was about right here between the culture, between you and other people. And I just felt this sense of like, since your spark came alive in your body, you knew that it was just, you knew it was about connection. And that is just such a beautiful image and just a wonderful at a young age to know that. That's just a gift. Like
Children are closer to the divine than we are as adults. And so I'd like to think that children can be wiser than we are. And yeah.
Wow.
I have a lot to learn from my younger self. She's more playful. She's more wild. Certain times she's more creative. I argue with her around that. But the stakes are not that high for them. And if they are in which I hope for all children, if they're in situations where they feel absolutely safe and protected, then they could just play and be and receive. I think that's a huge thing, like to receive. So I have a lot to learn from my younger self when it comes to this work.
I feel like I say this every episode, but there's so many places we could go.
Yes, you do, but that's good.
Are you open to maybe talk about like the inner child broadly, and even maybe more specifically how it's applying to you right now?
Yeah. So these days I've been leaning, that's a beautiful question. These days I've been talking more with my inner orphan who has experienced abandonment. And I say orphan as an archetype, right? Who, if I don't know what image y'all are thinking about, or what character even, like you could probably think about Oliver Twist or something, like a fictional character or an actual person. But it's not uncommon to think about how much the orphan has to like survive and has to like protect themselves, has to like really hustle. And in this inner child work, in this point of my life, I feel like the orphan, even though before I kind of like ignored her in the periphery a lot, because it's hard. It's hard to do shadow work in that way, because in some ways she's experienced rejection and I've also rejected her. So this is like my season of kind of like...
Oh, wait, stop. Just talk about that for just a minute. I don't want to totally interrupt, but, or come back to that. You've rejected her and she's experienced rejection.
Yeah, I think that in my rejection of her, I have to face and contend the parts of myself that I don't like about myself. The parts of me that I regard as a stranger. And I think in anti-racism work and in decolonizing work, or the aim to do anti-racism work and decolonization work, I believe part of my work around that is to really befriend that orphan, befriend that stranger, the parts of me that I do not like. Because if I'm not hospitable to them, how can I be, hospitable to the parts, to other people's inhospitable or unlovable parts? And I say that too as a therapist too. Like, what if there are certain parts of my work with my client that I don't like? Am I just going to like abuse my power by, you know what I mean? Like, I have, like, in order for me to bear witness and welcome a story in all of its griminess, in all of its chaos and filth, like, I have to be able to like bear my own. And similarly, like, I also want to bear my own beauty, which sometimes in certain cases too are really difficult, like to see the lovable parts of the orphan. It's also really difficult. For some of us, it's harder to receive goodness than it does punishment. Or struggle, because struggle is so familiar.
On that point of struggle, right, that's sort of evolutionary in some sense, in that our bodies were trained to pick up danger and sort of respond more to these negative emotions, and so it takes a bit of work to
all the time
step into the positive frequencies and ranges of our emotional network.
Absolutely, I agree with you 100%. So I work primarily with Black, Brown, Indigenous, and people of color patients or clients, and those who are also at the intersection of LGBTQIA+. So fight, flight, freeze, fawn, it's like default for them. Like, that's something that the hypervigilance is a part of their everyday life. And so when it comes to sessions where they met someone new and it's a wonderful person, or they received a reward or they had a really good day. Like it's hard for them to enjoy it. It takes a very long time for them to be present with it because they might think that it's gonna be taken away from them, that they don't have the right to experience pleasure, just a lot of defenses and, needing to protect themselves, which makes sense because this world, this country, this system is designed to have them struggle more. And, it's not an equitable system. It's designed specifically for a particular body, which is white, cis, hetero, non-disabled body. So it's hard to be present.
I experienced a lot of emotion as you were naming that all.
Do you want to talk about it?
Sure. I think, I'm thinking about, we're recording this as Black History Month, and for me, one of the decisions that I've made and how I'm going to honor it this year is just to be present to myself as much as I can. And in that, oftentimes, a lot of times people will compliment me and then follow it up with just receive that. Because either I'm demonstrably blushing or something or whatever. And I've always done that. Even from childhood of oh, no. And it was ingrained from a theological perspective of you have to be humble, you have to not be prideful, right? And so the default to getting rewards is to oh, by the grace of God, or
right.
Oh, that is no big
credit to some ethereal being when you actually did the work, when it's actually you.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
And for you to paint that or frame it as a trauma response or reaction, it felt like movement and something unlocking within to be or an understanding of myself of that's why I do that, and these are the things. It's not just been ingrained from that theological place, which that theological place is also has roots in cis hetero white supremacist culture as well, but also that ancestral knowledge that I get to heal and play with.
Yeah. Tommy, thank you for sharing that. And it takes naming the thing and among other things that would, capture the work. And it takes naming it first. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, thank you. And in a lot of movement spaces, I think especially ones that are rooted and centered in anti-racism, that awareness piece is one of the foundational things that I think a lot of movement spaces in this work are teaching and implementing in how they think about their actions and the work of getting free and being liberated as well. So it's really nice to be able to see those connections, which I find really interesting because you said earlier that you're rooted more so and what I discerned from this is spiritually rooted into nature and the stars and the alignment of the universe. Can you talk more about that and how and make some connection points for us?
Oh, you water sign baby. I'm a water sign baby. Yes. So.
I am a Cancer.
What are you?
Aquarius.
Huh?
Oh, happy birthday.
Thank you. This last 2 weeks ago. Yeah.
Belated happy birthday.
The air sign, right?
I'm in the baby part of learning all of my astrology. Or not my chart and stuff. So
we're all learning. With this, I want to acknowledge my ancient and recent ancestors. So I am a descendant of the Aita indigenous tribes of the Philippines, who are a nomadic tribe, and ask permission from them that I may speak about this more. So I want to acknowledge first that I'm still learning and still learning what it's like to be in my body and also to befriend and to get reacquainted, be mothered by the earth. I think that I exhale because I think about like the state of the earth right now too, and how even in her benevolence and her persistence, her resilience, like persistently like offering protection and food, like she holds us right now. I exhale, I sigh because of having to remember and not be denial about the state of the earth right now, and also what future generations are going to have to like contend with because of how much we have been complicit to her suffering, because the land is also oppressed. And we haven't been listening to our indigenous elders who have been warning us for centuries about this. So wanting to acknowledge that the grief of that, and that if we lean into this, there has to be an invitation of bravery in having to name that about the state of the world right now, especially when it comes to connecting with Mother Earth. But right now too, I also want to name that I can pour out my thoughts, my feelings onto Mother Earth, and her not breaking a sweat. And I borrow those words from, I think her name's Mia Songbird, who suggests that like if you feel like doing a grief practice, you place your, can't remember if it's your right or left ear, but one of your ears on the ground and just pour out your sorrow. This is me sharing a spiritual practice with y'all when it comes to grief, right? Pour out your sorrow, let it all out. Don't stop until it's all out. And then with your other ear, when it's all done, when you're ready, place or put your other ear on the ground and then listen what Mother Earth has to say to you. And you will know, you have an intuition to be able to hear from her. And there we see like reciprocity happening, reciprocity when it comes to communication. And being in a busy capitalistic world, it's hard for a lot of us to listen. Like even me, like I've been doing this work. I have the workshops that I do, the offerings that I have. It still takes a minute for me to like be in a place of solitude, of silence, and of stillness to actually like hear from spirit, to actually hear from Mother Earth, from my ancestors, from my guides. I also want to name real quick that maybe for some of y'all who are listening, there might be this voice that comes up that says, "Oh my gosh, that's woo woo." Oh my gosh, that's like maybe for some of you who identify specifically as Christian, like it might be terrifying. There might be a part of you that wants to like villainize or demonize it or render it as unclean. And there, it might be a great opportunity to interrogate that voice and wonder, like, who's to say? and what does that say about this internalized hierarchy of spiritual expression and belonging? So when it comes to like interconnectedness, there's a lot to learn, but I think there's more to unlearn than there is to learn. I think that's like going to be the way that I would conclude that. There's more to unlearn than there is to learn.
May I offer that maybe that isn't even a paradox, because in the unlearning, we are learning.
Offer, receive.
We are learning a new way. It is sort of the same notion of deconstruction by Foucault, I think is this person's name. But in the process of the deconstruction, we are simultaneously reconstructing the world as a pathway forward, as what it could be. The deconstruction never meant to simply destroy or to demolish. It was to set a ground to invite newness in. And so in the unlearning, simultaneously in that process, we were inviting a newness
So true.
into that space.
What that reminds me of is the cyclical nature of death and life, right? That death doesn't necessarily mean finality, but it makes that that room for life to come forth. It allows for, I think about the theme of apocalypse too. Like, people often think that apocalypse is the end, but really it's necessary destruction. The archetype of apocalypse specifically, it's necessary destruction for there to be a new world, the change that you actually want. That's why people are so terrified by the word abolition, at least in my circles. Like, when I bring up the abolition of the PIC and amongst other forms of abolition, people don't think about the creativity, the generativity, the life that can come forth after you bring an oppressive system or way of being to death.
Yeah.
That the death was actually necessary for newness to come forth, for a more humanizing ecological or ecosystem, for us to be like in our natural selves where nobody is oppressed and oppressing, because oppressing is also unnatural to humanity.
Wow. So, one, thank you so much for that journey that you just took us on, and for the indigenous wisdom that you shared here. And I just wanted to take a moment to really honor that and to express gratitude, because that is truly sacred and special. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for receiving.
Yeah. And I want to bring all of that deep spiritual foundation back to sort of the world as it is today. And you said that you're an anti-capitalist, and I am too. And how is all of that informing your movements in this interconnectedness in that work of dismantling sort of capitalism and the anxiety that I feel like comes alongside of dismantling any structure, but especially capitalism? People are like deeply vested in capitalism as a way of being, as a way of life, and
as a way of safety.
Yeah, and what in my experience and my learning, capitalism is just deeply tied to all these systems of oppression that continue to keep us in bondage and to keep us distracted from healing, because we are labor. It's just another form of bondage, right? And so in that, with that deep spiritual well and deep spiritual journey and in your work and talking to your inner child and this interconnectedness, how has that formed your anti-capitalist practice? And in your opinion, why isn't that something that we should be afraid of?
Oh, Lordy. Well, I'll speak into like how it informs my work and my practice.
Yeah.
So every morning, this is I never talked about this in a podcast before, so y'all are special.
Thank you.
Every morning when I wake up, I try my best to kind of like do ritual and reserve like an hour and a half of my mornings, with myself and in prayer or manifestation and gratitude. So in the morning when I rise, I kind of like either touch my face or my head and say my name out loud. I'm Gabes Torres. I know who I am. I am a descendant of, and then I'll name my grandparents. I'm a descendant of, I'll name my parents first. I'm a descendant of Mirza Betía Torres and Gerardo Torres. I'm a descendant of Candelaria Escambrosa Betía. And, I would name the ancestors whom I remember, as a way to kind of like humanize myself. Because I think that what is anti-capitalist is to humanize or rehumanize oneself. Because the way that the message of capitalism and even like colonialism, it says that we are commodities or resources or products to be shaped or reshaped or used by the oppressor. So in that practice that I do every day, as I name my name and as I welcome the spirit of my ancestors in this space and remember their humanity, I believe all the more that I'm not a commodity, that I am a human being with a face, with desires, with fears and preferences, with dreams. That's when the manifestation comes in and the prayer comes in, is when I, state it out loud. I'm very fortunate that I live by myself, so I can like state it out loud. But what I find really important in this humanizing work, and therefore this anti-capitalist work, is to locate and find the ways that you feel more, where you can just be human, and it's not just like how you access pleasure, but also like welcome your idiosyncrasies and quirks and limitations. Oh my gosh, bless those limitations, bless those mistakes, bless the parts of you that can only reach this far when the world expects you to go like 10 miles further, when that's actually like robotic, and so that's like one of the practices that I do. And I think that there's also something about, like I mentioned earlier, like being face to face with somebody else. I would find community, the kindred spirits whom I feel safe enough to just unmask and play with. Who the image that comes to mind right now is, so I think about my friends right now, and the image that comes to mind is like our inner children are playing together psychically or energetically, and because in some ways like our inner children are still there too. It's like our unconscious are already like in intimate relation with one another. One story that I would share in my workshop, my ancestral workshop, is that I met a woman at a panel at this event, and we clicked right away. It's one of those like immediate connections that you have with people. Like you don't know what it is, but it felt like you knew each other in a past life or something like that. So we decided to have sushi one night. Then we were having dinner. And then for some reason, like I felt compelled to ask her the question, to share each other's like ancestral journey. Like, how do you know your ancestral lineage? Who were they? What did they do? And, she started to tell her story and I started to tell mine. And then I mentioned that my Lola, my grandma, was a guerrilla warrior during World War II. She was a guerrilla spy for the Philippines against colonization. And she pauses and looks at me and was like, wait, which base? Turns out our grandmas knew each other.
Oh my gosh.
And we confirmed it from her grandma, because my grandma's no longer living, but they were buds.
Oh my gosh.
It kind of like made sense.
Wow.
Right? She and I connected so deeply and so immediately is because of that connection. And it was because of that friendship that made me like lean into this work a little bit more. Like, who were the folks who came before us? And, like, who am I that is connected to who they are? Like, I am a site. My body is like a point of reference to who they were. In fact, like my friendships are a point of reference to their friendships. So it's a wild universe, y'all.
I just think about that again. It's Black History Month, and
Mm-hmm.
Often I think about the starting point being my detachment from my ancestry. And really at this point, though, there's a lot of history that I do have ancestry here on this land, on this earth, on this ground. And when I say that I'm taking Black History Month for myself, it's in honor of that memory and of that struggle, but also of that liberation and that joy.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah. This has been an incredible and grounding, and I just feel wrapped in warm embrace. Gabes, how can people participate in your offerings and in your gifts and who you are and what you put out into the world?
Thanks, Bubba. This might sound very... Before I answer that, I wanted to say, Tommy, that that as you smile, I feel like you have an ancestor who smiles the way that you do too. For real. Like, as I feel like a lot, or maybe it could be the case that a lot of your ancestors are surrounding you right now with that embrace and who are smiling upon you.
She's gonna make me cry, y'all. I'm just gonna sob now. Wow, I feel that.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you mentioned like the deep exhale that people get upon hearing your laughter, that is both yours and also that which you inherited. Perhaps that is something that your ancestors, known or unknown, were known for, to bring joy and ease.
It's official that I've shed tears on the podcast, y'all. Officially. Yeah, I don't have any words after that. Thank you.
Okay, y'all can find me on GabesTorres.com. I'm also on Instagram, on Twitter, on Facebook. I'm not on TikToks. I am, however, on Clubhouse. But yes, you can find my stuff there.
I'm still trying to figure out how to work that thing.
Which one? Clubhouse?
Yeah.
I just check whenever somebody follows me. I truly don't participate in any talks because it's like, anyway.
All right, everybody, that's our show. We'll put all that contact info in the show notes. And Gabes is a friend of the pod. Gabes is also on the Speaking of Racism board. She's part of the collective of love that we have. So she's a friend of the pod. Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Hey everybody, it's Tommy. Just have a couple outro notes for you. First one is first. Just wanted to let you know that Gabe's Heritage Workshop is now full. I honestly don't remember if we actually mentioned it on the podcast because we recorded this back in February. And if I'm being honest, it might be 3 a.m. and I'm finishing this edit right now. So, that Heritage Workshop was an ancestral workshop for Black, Indigenous, and Brown people of color to participate in as a way to cultivate practices for our ancestral heritage and healing. So there is a wait list. You can still go to Gabe's website, sign up for that, get on the wait list. And if you are a person deemed white, feel free to offer support via a donation so that you might sponsor others who might be able to go. In addition to that, we wanted to also acknowledge the rise in anti-Asian violence here in the United States of America. A few weeks ago, we know there was a mass shooting in Atlanta, and that there's generally been a rise of anti-Asian violence, especially towards Asian and Asian American Pacific Islander elders in this country. And so, as a reminder, some of the things that you can do is to participate in mutual aid networks, and as always, continue to educate yourself about the history of discrimination of various groups in this country, and to speak up whenever you see racism rearing if I get my words out, rearing its ugly head. We're so grateful that you are with us on this journey as we grow, as we learn, as we have these conversations. And in addition to that, we also recognize that currently the Derek Chauvin trial is going on. And for those that don't remember, Derek Chauvin was the police officer who murdered George Floyd. And so lots of trauma going on. And however you are able to root into co-conspiratorship and allyship, we invite you to do that. And we will see you soon with some more fantastic conversations in a couple weeks.
Yo, that was our show. Thanks for listening to Permission to Be. Thank you to our guests. So if you want more information, head on over to permissiontobepodcast.com to check out the show notes. Get some more information on our guests that we post over there. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, leave a rating. If there's somebody that you want to see on this podcast telling their story, we also want to hear from you. So make sure to connect with us on Facebook and Instagram, Permission to Be Podcast, and we'll see you soon.
I love that question.
Who would play you in a biopic of your life, Gabes Torres?
If it involves a love interest with Michael B. Jordan and Chris Evans, then I would play
all the way.
I am in.
Yes.
I'll do it.
Yes and yes.
I'll do it.
Praise.
Tommy just went from tears